By the third week, the palace had learned how to exist around a silent king. Alpha King Kale lay motionless beneath pale linen in the royal recovery chamber, his breathing shallow but steady, his face stripped of the authority that once made entire council tables fall quiet. Healers came and went with clipped voices. Ministers entered to receive updates, spoke over him as if discussing an empty throne, then left without once addressing the man in the bed. Servants were no different. They changed sheets, refilled water, fed the fire, bowed before leaving. No one spoke to him. Elara noticed because noticing was what kept a poor Omega employed. She had learned years ago that people with rank preferred servants who moved quietly, answered quickly, and disappeared before becoming inconvenient. So when the senior housekeeper assigned her to clean the king's chamber, Elara lowered her eyes and accepted without complaint. The room was unnaturally still. She swept around the bed, replaced the water basin, straightened the curtains, and tried not to look at him. Everyone knew the story. The king had been thrown from his horse on the northern road. His body had survived. His mind, according to the healers, might never return. Elara carried a bundle of used cloth toward the door, then stopped. It bothered her suddenly that dozens of people entered this room every day and treated him like furniture. She looked back. "This is probably against protocol," she whispered. Kale did not move. Elara glanced toward the closed door. "They'd probably dismiss me for annoying you while you're unconscious." Still nothing. A nervous smile touched her mouth. "Although if you complain, I suppose that would solve several problems at once." She returned to the bedside and adjusted the water pitcher unnecessarily. The next morning she spoke again. Then the morning after that. At first she told him harmless things. The rain had finally stopped. One of the kitchen boys had dropped an entire tray of eggs. The palace hounds refused to leave the western courtyard because a squirrel had apparently insulted their honor. She never expected an answer. That made speaking strangely easy. By the end of the week, she found herself saying things she would never have dared say to the Alpha King awake. "Everyone acts frightened," she murmured one evening while adding wood to the fire. "But mostly they seem frightened of what happens if you don't wake." Her hands stilled. "Some of them already talk like you're gone." Behind closed eyes, Kale heard every word. He could not open them, could not move a finger, could not force breath into speech. But he knew her footsteps now. Knew the soft scrape of her bucket across stone. Knew that hers was the only voice that spoke to him instead of around him. Elara finished straightening the bedside table, then hesitated. "There is something else," she said quietly. "Something about the night of your accident that doesn't make sense." Elara immediately regretted saying it. She looked toward the door again, half expecting someone to have heard her through the heavy wood. "It may be nothing," she added. "And I'm probably being foolish." She finished arranging the bedside table and left before courage could tempt her into saying more. But she returned the next morning. And the next. Soon her visits formed a rhythm neither of them acknowledged. Elara swept, changed the basin water, tended the fire and talked. Sometimes she told Kale about the palace. Sometimes she complained about being given the worst cleaning shifts, then remembered who she was complaining to and apologized. "You own the palace," she told him once. "So technically, I suppose I'm blaming you." A faint laugh escaped her. "Please forget that if you wake up." Inside the prison of his body, Kale waited for that voice. He had learned the footsteps of healers, guards, ministers, servants. Most entered with purpose and left quickly. Elara alone filled the silence without asking anything from him. She never praised his victories, never called him magnificent, never begged for favor from a man she believed incapable of granting it. She simply spoke. One afternoon, Elara lifted the drinking water from his bedside tray and paused. There was a faint bitterness beneath the clean scent of water and herbs. She frowned and smelled it again. "That's strange." Kale heard the pitcher touch the table. "The healer said they were keeping your treatment simple today." She leaned closer, trying to identify the unfamiliar herbal scent. Maybe they added something afterward. Kale could not see what she held, but he knew that smell. Memory supplied what his eyes could not. Canvas medical tents, blood-soaked armor, surgeons using a rare sedative before cutting wounded soldiers open. Enough of it could drag even a powerful alpha into darkness. Why was it beside his bed? His body had been healing. He could feel that much through the fog. Yet every time awareness sharpened, darkness returned. Elara replaced the pitcher carefully. "I shouldn't question royal healers," she whispered. "They know more than a maid ever will." Footsteps sounded beyond the door. She straightened instantly. "I should go." Her bucket scraped softly across the floor. The door opened, then closed behind her. Seconds later it opened again. A man entered. Cale recognized the measured footsteps before the first word was spoken. Someone who had stood near his throne often enough to move through royal rooms without hesitation. While Elara had been present, the voice beyond the door had sounded courteous. Now it changed. Lower. Colder. "Still sleeping, Your Majesty?" Silence followed. Then the man moved closer to the bed. Good. For the first time since darkness had swallowed him, Cale understood that waking might not be the only thing he needed to survive. By the following week, Elara no longer needed anyone to tell her when the royal chamber was empty. She knew the changing of the guards, the healer's usual rounds, and the brief quiet intervals when only the king and the crackling fire remained. That was when she talked most freely. "You know what I've learned?" she murmured one morning while wiping dust from the window ledge. "People say extraordinary things around someone they don't consider important." She glanced toward Cale. "And apparently they say even more around someone they think can't hear." Cale remained perfectly still. Elara smiled faintly and returned to her work. "Being an Omega teaches you that. Keep your head down, carry what you're told, and eventually, people forget you're standing there." Her smile disappeared. "It isn't pleasant, but you learn things." Cale listened. He had begun measuring time by her visits. The world beyond them came to him in fragments. Doors opening, clinical instructions, footsteps, hands moving his body, bitter liquid touching his mouth, then the familiar descent into heavier darkness. Elara's voice was different. It gave the darkness shape. That afternoon she arrived unusually quiet. "I heard something today." Her cloth stopped moving across the bedside table. "One healer told the kitchen staff your evening mixture had been reduced. He said your body needed less medicine now." She hesitated. "But later I heard different instructions given to the servant carrying the treatment tray. Same time. Different amount." Cale's thoughts sharpened. Elara lowered her voice. "Maybe I misunderstood." She always gave people that possibility, Cale had noticed. She observed first and accused no one. "But it bothered me." She moved toward the medicine tray. A discarded vial rested beside folded cloths. Elara picked it up, studying the markings before setting it exactly where she had found it. The door opened. She stepped away immediately. Lord Varric entered with another healer behind him. "Servant." Elara bowed. "My lord. Your duties do not include examining His Majesty's treatment." "No, my lord." "Then remember that." Varric's tone remained controlled, but Elara's fingers tightened around her cleaning cloth. "Yes, my lord." She gathered her things and left. Cale heard Varric issue instructions after the door closed. The dosage he named was not the reduced amount Elara had overheard earlier. For the first time, her uncertainty became his. The following morning, Elara returned carrying fresh water. She said nothing until she was certain they were alone. "I think I made him angry." She set down the basin. "I wasn't trying to interfere. I only wanted to understand why the bottles looked different." Cale strained against the dead weight of his hand. "Nothing." Elara came closer. His breathing had changed. She was almost certain of it. She stared at his face. "Can you hear me?" Every part of Cale's mind answered yes. His body gave her nothing. Elara waited. Then embarrassment softened her expression. "Of course not." She looked away, but Cale could hear disappointment beneath the words. After a moment, she reached for the discarded vial from the previous treatment. "I still don't believe I'm imagining this." She turned it slowly between her fingers, memorizing its markings. "I'll check the next bottle they throw away." Elara returned it precisely to its place. "And if I'm wrong, no one ever needs to know." She picked up her bucket and paused beside his bed. "But if I'm right, Your Majesty, I think someone doesn't want a maid asking why your medicine keeps changing." The next discarded vial carried the same unfamiliar markings. Elara found it beneath folded cloths after the morning healers had gone. She did not touch it immediately. Instead, she studied the narrow symbols from where she stood, comparing them with the fresh bottle waiting on the medicine tray. Different again. Her stomach tightened. She had no authority to question Lord Varric, much less accuse him of anything. A maid's suspicion would become insolence the moment it reached the wrong ears. So Elara said nothing. She watched. Over the next several visits, she began noticing when the medicine arrived, who carried it, and whether Varric entered before or after another healer had prepared the treatment. She committed each detail to memory without interfering. Beside Cale's bed, however, silence remained difficult. "I spend my whole life trying not to be noticed," she admitted while smoothing the curtains. "And somehow I've become suspicious because I notice too much." Cale listened from behind closed eyes. Elara gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "That's the trouble with being invisible. People forget invisible things can still see them." She moved to his bedside. "I shouldn't tell you any of this." Her voice softened. "But you're the only person I don't have to become smaller around." The word struck deeper than any praise Cale had heard from his court. She believed he was powerless to reward her. She believed he could not judge her, command her, or even remember her. And still she came. "If you wake up," Elara continued, "I'll probably be terrified of you." A small smile entered her voice. "I'll bow, say your majesty, and pretend I've never complained about your palace, your servants, or that ridiculous chair by the window." Cale wanted absurdly to tell her the chair was not his choice. Instead, there was only silence. Later that afternoon, Elara was replacing the basin when another healer entered carrying a prepared dose. She stepped aside. Before the healer could administer it, Varric appeared. "I'll handle His Majesty's treatment." The healer surrendered the bottle and left. Elara lowered her gaze, but she watched Varric's hands. He placed the prepared medicine aside. Then he removed another vial. The markings matched the discarded bottle. Elara's pulse quickened. She said nothing as Varric administered it. For several minutes nothing changed. Then Cale's breathing faltered. Elara heard it before Varric seemed to react. She turned. The king's chest rose once, stopped too long, then rose again with visible effort. "My lord." Varric ignored her. "My lord," his breathing changed. "I am aware." But Cale's next breath came weaker. Elara abandoned every instinct telling her to remain silent. "Help!" she shouted toward the corridor. "Someone get the healers." Varric's head snapped toward her. Footsteps thundered outside. Other healers rushed into the chamber, forcing Varric away from the bedside as they examined the king. Elara retreated to the wall, shaking while orders filled the room. Cale's breathing eventually steadied. No one thanked her. Varric looked at her once before leaving. That look was enough. That evening, when Elara was finally allowed back inside to finish her duties, she approached Cale's bed without speaking. The chamber seemed colder than before. She looked at his motionless hand. Then carefully she placed hers around it. "If somebody is doing this to you," she whispered, fear trembling beneath every word, "I'll find out who." For the next 2 days, Elara changed nothing that anyone could see. She cleaned the chamber, refilled the basin, lowered her eyes when Varric entered. She asked no questions, but she watched every treatment. By now she knew the pattern. The ordinary medicine arrived first. Then, whenever Varric personally intervened, the marked vial appeared. On the third afternoon, Elara saw him approaching down the corridor just as another servant carried Cale's prepared treatment toward the royal chamber. Her heart began to pound. She could not steal the medicine. She could not accuse Varric. She could not explain why she needed time. So she stepped backward with her water bucket and deliberately collided with the servant. Water crashed across the floor. The servant cried out as the treatment tray tilted. Elara caught it before the bottle fell, but the corridor erupted in confusion. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry." By the time the spill was cleared and another basin fetched, Varric had been summoned elsewhere. The prepared medicine reached Cale without being replaced. Elara expected nothing to happen. Instead, several hours later she noticed his breathing. It was deeper. Not merely easier. Different. She closed the chamber door and approached the bed. "Your Majesty?" No response. Elara sat carefully beside him. "I did something very stupid today." Cale heard her with a clarity he had almost forgotten was possible. The fog had thinned. I prevented Lord Varric from reaching your medicine. Her fingers twisted together. If I'm wrong about him, I may have just interfered with the treatment of the Alpha King because I don't understand bottles. Cale fought against the weight holding him down. Elara continued, quieter now. But you seem better. She looked at his hand. For weeks, she had spoken because she believed silence demanded nothing from her. Now she found herself afraid of what an answer might mean. Can you hear me? Yes. Cale forced everything he had toward his fingers. Nothing happened. Elara waited. Her shoulders slowly fell. I knew it. She gave a small embarrassed laugh. I've spent so long talking to you that I've started imagining you're listening. She placed her hand over his. Cale gathered himself again. Move. His finger twitched beneath her palm. Elara froze. For several seconds she did not breathe. Then she leaned closer. Was that you? Cale concentrated until pain seemed to burn through his arm. His fingers moved again. This time they closed weakly around hers. Elara jerked backward, nearly overturning the chair. Her face drained of color. Oh! Cale could not release her quickly enough to reassure her. She stared at him in horror. You can hear me. His fingers tightened once. Elara covered her mouth. Every complaint, every joke, every confession made because she believed the man beside her existed beyond judgment rushed back at once. You heard me complain about your chair. Another weak squeeze. Despite her fear, a breathless sound escaped her that was almost laughter. Then the danger returned to her face. She looked toward the door. If you're aware, they cannot know. Cale squeezed once. Elara leaned closer, lowering her voice. If Lord Varric has been keeping you asleep, and he discovers you're responding. She did not finish. Neither needed her to. For the first time, the silence between them belonged to both of them. Elara wrapped her hand around his again. I need to ask you something. Once for yes. Nothing for no. She waited until his fingers relaxed. Her next question came barely above a whisper. Was what happened to you really an accident? Cale remained still. Elara's breath caught. Then she realized her mistake. Once for no, she corrected softly. Was it an accident? Cale summoned what strength remained. His fingers closed around hers once. No. Elara did not sleep much that night. By morning, one fact had settled beneath her fear. Cale had answered deliberately. Whatever had happened on the northern road had not been an accident, and whoever had arranged it might still have access to his room. She entered carrying fresh water and performed every task exactly as before. Only after the guards changed and the corridor fell quiet did she approach him. We need rules. Cale's fingers rested motionless beside her hand. 1 squeeze for yes. 2 for no. Nothing complicated. And only when we're alone. 1 squeeze. Elara exhaled. Good. Because I refuse to get executed over a misunderstanding caused by your fingers. A second later, his thumb shifted faintly against her skin. She stared at it. Was that amusement? 1 squeeze. For the first time since discovering he could hear her, Elara smiled without embarrassment. Their strange language remained painfully limited. Cale could confirm suspicions but could not explain what he knew. When Elara asked whether Varric was involved in keeping him unconscious, she received 1 squeeze. When she asked whether Varric had caused the original attack, Cale gave 2. So someone else is involved. 1 squeeze. That answer frightened her more. Elara returned to doing what invisibility had taught her best, watching patterns. Varric rarely carried messages himself. Yet after certain private council sessions, sealed instructions reached him through palace staff. Elara began noticing one name repeatedly connected to those meetings. Chancellor Marek. Cale's longtime advisor. She did not accuse him. She brought the observation back to Cale. Marek meets with the council. Soon afterward, Varric receives sealed instructions. Maybe that's normal. Cale's fingers tightened once. Elara went still. You distrust him? 1 squeeze. The room suddenly seemed too exposed. She released Cale's hand as footsteps passed outside. Days earlier, she had wished desperately for him to answer. Now every answer created another danger. Yet something else had changed between them. She no longer spoke because she thought he was safely absent. She spoke because he was there. She told him when she was frightened. He answered when he could. Once, when she admitted she had spent most of her life believing survival meant giving powerful people no reason to remember her name, his hand closed around hers and remained there until his strength failed. Then one evening Cale moved his wrist. Barely. But Elara saw it. You are getting stronger. One squeeze. Hope rose so quickly that she almost called the guards. Cale's fingers closed twice. No. She understood. If Varric and Marek believed him helpless, they still had time. If they discovered he could communicate, that time vanished. So Elara swallowed the announcement that could have protected her from every accusation of interference. She kept his consciousness secret. The cost arrived sooner than she expected. The following afternoon, Chancellor Marek stopped her outside the royal chamber. He was composed, impeccably dressed, his expression almost pleasant. Elara, isn't it? Her stomach tightened. A man like Marek had no reason to know the name of a poor Omega maid. Yes, Chancellor. You've been spending considerable time with His Majesty. I perform the duties assigned to me. Of course. His gaze rested on her for a moment too long. Then he stepped aside. Elara entered the chamber without looking back. Only when the door closed did she realize her hands were shaking. She hurried to Cale. He knows who I am. Cale's fingers closed around hers. Before she could say more, voices sounded beyond the door. Marek. Varric. Elara moved silently toward it, stopping before the handle turned. Their words came faintly through the wood. The improvement is becoming noticeable, Varric murmured. Marek answered in the same controlled voice Cale had heard beside his bed weeks earlier. Then increase it. A pause. He cannot be allowed another lucid interval. Elara remained beside the door until the footsteps faded. Increase it. The words left no room for doubt. Varric was deliberately suppressing Cale's recovery, and Marek was directing him. She returned to the bedside. I heard them. Cale's fingers closed once around hers. They know you're improving. Another squeeze. Elara swallowed. Then we don't have much time. She had barely finished speaking when the chamber door opened. Marek stood there with 2 royal guards. His expression was calm. Elara, you will come with us. Her blood went cold. Why? Questions have arisen concerning His Majesty's treatment. Behind him, Varric entered carrying several records. The healer placed them on the table. This servant interfered with a prescribed dose, he said. There are witnesses. Elara understood immediately. The spilled water. The delayed treatment. What she had done to keep Varric away from Cale now looked exactly like what they needed it to look like. I was protecting him. Marek's eyebrows lifted. From his own healer? Elara looked toward Cale. She could not reveal that he was conscious. Not while Marek and Varric controlled the accusation. I noticed inconsistencies in the medicine. You are a maid, Varric said. Not a healer. And His Majesty improved when you didn't replace his dose. Silence fell. Marek's pleasant expression disappeared. Remove her. The guards took Elara by the arms. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to become small again. Apologize. Claim confusion. Say she had misunderstood. That was how an Omega survived among people powerful enough to erase her. But as they pulled her toward the door, she saw Varric approach Cale's medicine tray. If she left quietly, Varric would have unrestricted access to him. No. The guards stopped. Elara raised her voice. Lord Varric has been changing the king's medicine. Servants in the corridor turned toward her. Marek stepped forward. Be very careful. He gives His Majesty different doses from the ones prepared by the other healers. The bottles have different markings. The king becomes worse after Varric uses them. Varric's face hardened. She has no idea what she's describing. Then let another healer examine the medicine. More people had gathered now. Elara's knees trembled, but she forced herself to continue. And Chancellor Marek has been sending him instructions. Enough. Marek's command cracked through the corridor. Elara looked directly at him. I heard you tell Lord Varric the king could not be allowed another lucid interval. The silence that followed was absolute. Marek ordered the guards to detain her pending investigation, but the accusation had already spread beyond the chamber. Another healer demanded that no further treatment be administered until the medicines were examined. For the moment, Elara had bought Kale time. It cost her the only protection she had ever trusted. No one would overlook her now. She was taken to a small guarded room in the servants' wing. There, with nothing left to do but think, the final shape of the danger became clear. Varric had been exposed publicly. Marek had been named publicly. If they were innocent, Elara faced ruin. If they were guilty, they could no longer afford patience. She stood suddenly. Kale. Outside. Raised voices moved through the corridor as servants and officials argued over her accusation. Elara pressed closer to the door, listening. Then she heard something that frightened her more than shouting. A guard asking where Chancellor Marek had gone. No one knew. Elara closed her eyes. She had spent her entire life surviving by making herself invisible. Now invisibility would kill the one person who had hurt her when no one else bothered to listen. She struck the door with both fists. Open this. No answer. Someone checked the king. Footsteps passed without stopping. Elara stepped back, staring at the old servant's door and the narrow service passage beyond its adjoining storage access. The same route she had spent years using because people like Marek never noticed where maids came from. She understood what she had to do. Back in the royal chamber, the main door opened quietly. Kale heard familiar measured footsteps approaching his bed. Marek had returned alone. Marek stopped beside the bed. For several seconds he said nothing. Kale could hear his own breathing, stronger now than it had been days earlier, but his body remained agonizingly slow to obey him. Then glass touched wood. You always were difficult to kill, Marek said softly. The voice tore open a memory. Darkness. Pain. The northern road. Kale had not awakened after the attack. Not fully, but sound had returned before movement, arriving in broken fragments through a fog of pain and drugs. That voice had been there. Not every word. Not enough then to understand. Later, inside this chamber, he had heard more. Marek speaking with Varric when they believed the king was beyond awareness. References to the road. To dozes. To council authority that could remain in Marek's hands while Kale lived but could not rule. Then Elara had begun talking. Her observations had connected what Kale could only hear. The bitter sedative he recognized, the changed vials he could not see, Varric's substitutions, the instructions following Marek's council meetings. She had given shape to his prison. And now Marek believed she had been removed. You should have remained asleep, he murmured. A stopper came free. Kale tried to move. His hand shifted barely an inch. Marek saw it. For the first time his composure broke. So she was right. He reached for the medicine. A hidden service panel opened behind him. Elara stumbled into the chamber, breathless from the narrow servant's passage. Get away from him. Marek spun. For one stunned instant neither moved. Then he seized the vial. Elara ran forward. Marek caught her shoulder and threw her aside. She struck the bedside table hard enough to send the water pitcher crashing to the floor. Do you understand what you've done? He hissed. Elara pushed herself upright. Yes. She could run. Instead, she lunged for the hand holding the vial. Marek grabbed her wrist, but Elara struck the bottle against the bed frame. Glass shattered. Liquid spilled across the linen and floor. Marek's face twisted. His hand closed around her throat. Kale heard Elara choke. Move. Pain ripped through his body as he forced one arm from the mattress. Marek looked toward him. That instant was enough for Elara to wrench backward. Voices erupted beyond the main door. Her accusation had done what she intended. Too many people were now questioning the treatment for Marek to keep the royal chamber isolated. The doors opened. Guards, council officials, and another healer stopped at the sight before them. Marek released Elara. She attacked me, he said immediately. The maid has contaminated His Majesty's medicine. Elara stared at the guards. He was trying to give it to him. On the word of an Omega servant? Marek demanded. Against the Chancellor and the King's appointed healer? Kale knew what would happen if he remained silent. Elara had already risked everything because she believed him. Now silence protected only him. He forced air into lungs that had forgotten how to command a voice. Marek. The name emerged rough and broken. Everyone froze. Kale opened his eyes. The room swayed, but he kept them open. Marek went white. Kale spoke again, each word costing him. Varric changed. The medicine. The healer near the door stared at him. Marek ordered it. Marek stepped backward. Your Majesty, you're confused. No. Kale's gaze found Elara, then returned. To the guards. I heard them. He gave fragments only he could know. Marek's words beside the bed, Varric's discussions of altered doses, references to the staged attack on the northern road, and their plan to preserve Marek's emergency authority by keeping the king alive but incapacitated. Elara supplied what hearing alone could not. The marked vials, conflicting instructions, the substituted treatments, the pattern between Varric's doses and Kale's decline. The other healer bent over the shattered glass, recognition dawning. Marek's denial collapsed beneath evidence accumulated in silence. Kale's strength was failing. Still, he gave one final command. Seize Marek. Varric too. The guards obeyed. And Elara. She turned toward him. Protect her. Only after Marek was taken away did Kale allow his head to sink back against the pillow. Elara approached slowly. Relief warred with something much more uncomfortable across her face. You heard their conversations. Yes. And mine. Kale looked at the woman whose voice had carried him through weeks of darkness. Elara's expression changed as she remembered everything she had ever said beside this bed. She swallowed. How much? His exhausted eyes remained on hers. Every word. Every word. Elara stood beside the bed, staring at him as if Marek's arrest had suddenly become the less terrifying revelation. Kale was too exhausted to explain further. Speaking had taken more from him than anyone in the room understood, and within minutes the healers ordered everyone away while they examined him. This time, however, no medicine entered the chamber without independent inspection. The investigation moved quickly because Elara's accusations no longer stood alone. The marked vials were recovered and compared with the prescribed treatments. Records confirmed unexplained changes in dosage. Servants verified deliveries between Marek's council sessions and Varric's private visits. Most damning were the conversations Kale repeated once he was strong enough to speak for longer than a few words. He had heard enough. Together, the evidence confirmed what Elara's observations had begun to expose. The attack on the northern road had been arranged, and the drugs administered afterward had been used to keep Kale incapacitated while Marek accumulated authority through the council. Marek and Varric were formally removed from power and held to answer for what they had done. Kale did not rise from his bed the next morning and reclaim his kingdom as though nothing had happened. Recovery came slowly. His legs weakened after only a few steps. His voice sometimes failed halfway through a sentence. He required healers, rest, and time. Elara understood that better than anyone. What she did not understand was why she was still in the palace. She had interfered with royal treatment, concealed the king's consciousness, accused the chancellor publicly, escaped detention, and shattered a medicine vial beside the royal bed. So when Kale asked to see her privately several days later, Elara arrived prepared to be dismissed. She bowed. Your Majesty. Kale studied her from the chair beside the window. The ridiculous chair? Her eyes widened. Color rushed into her face. I was under considerable emotional strain when I formed that opinion. I remember. Unfortunately, I'm beginning to understand that. A faint smile crossed his face. Then his expression became serious. What do you want, Elara? She blinked. I don't understand. Everyone has spent weeks deciding what should happen to you. A reward. Position. Money. He paused. No one asked you. Elara had no immediate answer. All her life, wanting too much had seemed dangerous. Security meant keeping her head down and accepting whatever place remained available. I want. She stopped. Kale waited. Not commanded. Waited. I don't want to disappear again. The admission surprised her. Kale's gaze did not leave her. You won't. She looked down. Because I saved you? No. That made her look up. Before you knew I could hear you, you had nothing to gain from me. You spoke to me when everyone else spoke around me. You noticed what powerful men assumed no one beneath them would notice. And when you finally knew I could hear you, You risked everything anyway. Elara swallowed. So this is gratitude. It began before gratitude. The room became very quiet. For once, Elara did not hide inside that silence. And now, she asked. Kale held out his hand. Now I would like you to stay because you choose to. No order. No debt. No alpha claiming an omega because hierarchy allowed it. A choice. Elara crossed the distance and placed her hand in his. I'd like that. Weeks later, she found herself in the royal recovery chamber again. The medicines were gone. The curtains stood open. Kale was strong enough to sit beside her rather than lie helpless beneath the linen. Elara looked at the bed and remembered the first frightened conversation she had begun because she could not bear watching everyone treat a living man as though he were already absent. She smiled. You know, I once told you that you didn't have to answer because I'd talk enough for both of us. I remember that too. Of course you do. Kale's hand found hers. Elara had once believed invisibility was the safest thing she could become. Now she understood the difference between being unnoticed and being safe, between silence and peace, between existing beside someone and truly being known. So she began talking. And this time when the Alpha King listened, Elara knew he could hear every word.